When we go live. Hey, welcome everyone to this wonderful event launching the new book from the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion, Gull, the Border God, and the Stateless Beyond. I am so excited to join you all for this. My name is Malka Older. I am the Executive Director of Global Voices, and I'm also a speculative fiction author. And as such, this book represents really an intersection of not only my interests, but what I think is vitally important for the world at this time. We're in a moment where we are seeing renewed emphasis on borders, renewed attacks on migrants around the world. And it is so important that we start thinking beyond these immediate frameworks of discussion that are being pushed over and over across different areas, from social media to politicians. So I'm really pleased to see a book like this, which draws from an evidence-based report and builds on that knowledge and research with a story, a narration that is accessible to people, and one that uses imagination to consider different futures, to offer both warning and hope. So I'm very happy to introduce the participants in this section. I'm going to just briefly go through some of the participants and also the run of play for this launch. And then we'll have more information and full bios of each participant coming up in the chat as they come on. I do also want to ask everyone, as the discussion goes on, I'm sure there will be questions from the audience. Please do use the Q&A feature, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. And the questions will be collected there so that we can address them towards the end as needed. And we look forward to your participation. So briefly, we have some panelists who are going to be talking about different aspects of the book. Amal Dechikara, who is with the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion, and also has written several books and was fundamental in bringing this book forward. We'll begin by presenting the book in the website. Then there will be a discussion with Amal and Tendayi Achiume. Tendayi wrote the report that the book is based on. And so I am looking forward to hearing about both the report itself and the process of going from the report to this really interesting approach of communication and of the findings. After that, we will have a discussion between Roanti Dechikara and Yasmin Zulhaime, who were both involved as members of the creative team behind the book and the website. And so we'll respond both to the previous discussion, add their own perspectives, and also add further questions about the book. And we will also, unfortunately, one of the prospective panelists was unable to make it due to an injury. So we will also add at that time Petra Molnar, who was contributed reflections to the book, and we'll further discuss the way that the book unfolded and the meaning that it has. After that, we will have a little bit of time for the audience questions, which you hopefully will have put into the Q&A, and then we will wrap up, and hopefully you will have an interesting new perspective on this book, on borders, and something that you will be able to share with your networks. So from there, I would like to ask Amal if you would start us off by introducing the book itself.
Thank you so much, Malka, and thank you everyone for joining this conversation. It's a very happy day for us because this has been a project that has been in the making for several years now. Actually, I can't remember how many years it's been that long, but initially we supported Tendayi when she was at the time UN Special Rapporteur on racism, and she was interested in writing a report on the intersection between racism, technology, and borders, and how that impacts on racialized minorities and racialized groups. And we, at the time, we supported Tendayi to with her research process by introducing Tendayi to many stateless people who had kind of suffered the consequences of racist technology at borders. And that process led to what I believe has been one of the most powerful UN reports that I have read by a UN Special Rapporteur. Uh, and Tendayi can speak more about the report. And we were very happy to have contributed in some way to that. But then, as things tend to happen with the UN, the report was kind of Tendayi presented it to the UN General Assembly, and it was well received. And then after that, as per expectations, I would guess, uh, there wasn't much action in response to the many warnings, the many questions, the many challenges that the report actually put out to the global community. And that got us thinking if there was a way in which we could actually try and bring this report to life in a way which would resonate not just within the halls of the General Assembly, but also with the general public of the world, thinking people, caring people who are concerned about the direction and the directions we are taking, and who would welcome this kind of material and would perhaps be urged to act on it in different ways. And that's what got us down this kind of long drawn out project, which involved Petra, Tendayi, Ruanti, and many others. I think I need to, in particular, uh, call out Otlin Spearman, who was with ISI at the time. She's now doing her master's in investigative journalism, and she played a very integral role in kind of organizing and coordinating and also contributing to the writing of this book. And also my colleague Elena, who's right now behind the scenes handling everything in Zoom, but she was also pivotal in bringing the book to life. And our wonderful friend and colleague Hannah Kim, who was behind the illustrations of the book and played such a pivotal role in uh, the design and the look and feel of the book, uh, and who recently has had a baby. So I mean, there was a huge team behind this book, and the way we approached it was we wanted to really engage with what was in Tendayi's report. And so we studied the report in depth, and we started pulling out little passages of the report that particularly resonated with us. And we then invited several people uh, to kind of creatively engage with this material from the report. And some of these are people who had lived experience of statelessness, others were artists, some were academics. And we asked each of them to engage with a part of the report and respond to it. And that resulted in a very rich set of resources, some poems, some artwork, some academic writing, some creative fictional writing, which started coming our way, which was wonderful, but it also presented us with another challenge of how do we now do justice to all of this material. And as we started kind of trying to puzzle this together, what emerged uh, through this kind of creative process was the idea of actually writing a dystopian futuristic novel, which would basically present a world which could be a world that our world becomes should we fail as a human race to heed to the many warnings and challenges presented in Tendayi's uh, report. And that is what we have with the book. And what I would like to very quickly do is share my screen and show you what the book and the website look like. And then we can carry on with our conversation. I would encourage you all to look at this in your own time. Uh, but the website, which I think Elena will be sharing in the chat right now, it takes you straight into the book, and it's a very interactive website which has lots of different uh, ways in which you can engage with the material. So you can read the book straight. You have the chapters here that you can look at, but you can also go into this additional menu and read a message from Tendayi. You can go behind the story, which will give you a link to her report itself, and also give you access to all of the different creative contributions that people made as part of this project. And also you have access to links through which you can download the PDF of the book or buy the book as well. So I would encourage you to, in your own time, scroll through the website. It's a really beautiful website that we are very grateful to Yasmin and her colleagues for developing. Yeah, and on that note, let me hand back to Martha.
Yes, thank you. It is really, it's a lovely thing to see how a book and the capacity of the internet can come together to have an object that is an artifact that is so interactive, as well as presenting all of this knowledge. And so I would like to bring in at this point Tendayi to talk a little bit about going from the report to this book, as well as the findings of the initial report itself. The report was from 2020, and part of the conception behind the book was the idea that this could present the kind of future that we could face if we don't heed the report. Wondering, given the 5 years that have elapsed since then, has that changed your idea about potential futures? Has it affected how you think about what the book reflects from that report?
Thank you so much, Malka, and thank you so much to everybody who's on this call. So I don't even know where to start with my excitement. I mean, I know you want to talk about the report. I want to talk about the book, but I understand the need to lay this foundation. So in addition to answering your question, I thought I might just say a few things about the mandate, the process, and then get to what it feels like to read the book in 2025. But I think I just want to start by saying that Amal and Ruwanti, who we'll be hearing more about we're more from in a moment, I just want to thank you for this truly powerful piece of kind of creative output. I was reading it very closely this weekend, and I'm blown away. And I just want to say that separate from my report, which was also itself a collective endeavor, I just want to mark um, the independently powerful nature of the book. The book stands alone, and you don't need to read the report. You can only, to my mind, the book is what will be read, and that will be a win. So I was in my UN mandate from 2017, no, 2017 to 2022, and the mandate had me focusing on racism, xenophobia, and related intolerance. And for those who may not be familiar with the UN system, essentially I was an independent expert providing states on both, country reporting on how they were complying with their racial equality obligations, but then also had the freedom to pick thematic topics that I thought were topics of urgence at this intersection that states needed to be paying attention to. And in working on this report, it would not have been possible to produce this kind of report without the really powerful consultation and back and forth that I had from civil society communities, from stateless people, from refugees, from migrants, many of them through collaborations with people who are on this webinar. So you'll hear from Petra Molnar, who's on this webinar as well, and we'll talk a little bit about her role in it. But I want to say that Petra was one of my closest collaborators, and her own work on the intersection between technologies and borders very heavily influenced the report and comes through in the book as well. And Amal as well, and the Institute for Statelessness and Inclusion also made it possible for me to form sustained research relationships with migrants, refugees, stateless persons as people who could produce knowledge about how we understand the problem and the relationship between race, technology, and borders, and not just as actors who could testify to human rights violations that they had experienced. There was definitely that dimension as well, but part of what was powerful about the collaboration was from the beginning, really trying to center knowledge production about how we even think about the problem from the individuals, parts of the world, groups who are have lived experience with these technologies and are experiencing them. So this report was almost the twin of another report. The first report just focused on race and technology, and I was motivated to write that report because at the time, and I think it's less so the case now. So when I think about what's changed between now and then, when I started working on these reports, there was a tendency to collapse issues to do with racism and xenophobia, where tech was concerned, to cases of kind of online hate crimes and content moderation and focusing on explicit kind of a racist projects and xenophobic projects that were being mobilized in different online platforms. As we know, that problem has not gone away. It has been amplified in ways that are astounding. And I think that many of us hadn't per se. And well, we know, I think we could actually, even in 2020, we were living a version of the version that we are in now. But I think even I at the time hadn't realized how that dimension would continue to just accelerate. But the purpose of the race and tech report that I wrote was to shift beyond just a focus on explicit prejudice as the problem that tech posed from a racial justice perspective, and to say that, of course, as many people know, as people who do research, as people with lived experience with technology can tell us, tech reflects our values. It's a part of our society, and to the extent that they are deep injustices, such as racial injustice, technology is constructed by those injustices and amplifies and reifies forms of inequality that exist in society. And so it was about producing a kind of structural intersectional analysis of exactly what that looked like. And it felt urgent to do that in the case of borders as well, because when I took on my UN mandate, there's a way in which, at least within the UN context, discourse around borders and what racial justice and the racialization of borders actually entailed, again, focused on explicitly racist, nationalist projects of exclusion, while not paying attention to the way that fundamental institutions of borders, like nationality, like citizenship, have themselves baked in racial hierarchies that then shape who can move, who can belong, and on what terms. And the lived conditions of stateless persons, of migrants, of refugees really speak to the structural and systemic nature of racialized forms of hierarchy, even beyond just the more explicit expressions that we see. And so this was the goal of the report, is to say we're living in a world where technology is being presented as the solution to managing borders, to the violence of borders. And in making that move, it's reinforcing or masking the way in which technology itself is actually profoundly racialized and reifying, and in some cases making worse, forms of border injustice and border violence that are visible. And so I remember at the time, it was the first Trump administration, and there was a lot of backlash against Trump's proclamations that he was going to build a border wall between Mexico and the United States. And part of the rhetoric was, oh, we'll have smart borders in response to the idea of building a border wall. And the smart borders will be a more just and humane way of dealing with borders. And so that kind of rhetoric, which I would like to think at this time is untenable, but actually is nonetheless widespread and is shaping how our world is evolving. It was an urgency to kind of try and speak to those dynamics that motivated the production of the report. I want to, I can say more, and maybe in Q&A can come back to some of these themes, but I just want to say a few things about the book and to say something about this process of shifting from a dry UN report, which, one of the things that one of the anxieties I had when I was in the UN system is that even me, a professor of international human rights law, can barely bring myself to read UN reports. I read them because there's something that really makes me have to read them, which shouldn't be the way that these resources work, right? The idea is that they should be available and they should be easy to access. They should be intuitive. They should be where policymakers, lawyers, people who are trying to make sense of the world, where they reach to find the resources to help them make sense of them. And for the reality is that that's just not the case with reports that are often very difficult to find. I remember struggling to find my own UN reports, even just on the website as a technical matter. So pointing out that it was very frustrating to produce all of this knowledge, have all of these collaborations with many people who invested in the production of the report, and then think that it would just live on the shelf. And I remember when I think it was Amal, who suggested, what if we made this into a book that could reach more people, that was more accessible, that was visual, that involved just a different way of experiencing the information. And it felt unfathomable that it could happen. And I was like, okay, if you think this is a thing that we can do, let's absolutely do it. And I am so thrilled that they did. In reading the book, even I, who was involved in the drafting of the report in very intimate ways, I think was able to access different ways of thinking about the problem of borders by reading the book. And I think it's just a testament to how a shift of medium, a shift of expression can really just reconfigure how we understand the world. And I think this is why we do the work that we do, because we're trying to help each other make sense of what it means to be on this world and what it makes sense to be in this world and living in it. And I think that the book does a very powerful way of creating a different way of accessing that. I wanted to just highlight a few things that came out for me that I think are really important and that the report couldn't name directly. I think Gull's story is a story about change subjectivities, right? People are like how they understand themselves and who they are in the world seems to be the most profound site of border injustice and also the site through which the injustice is replicated and through which even fighting it becomes unfathomable, right? Like when we meet Gull, her inability to conceive of a world where the border is questionable just doesn't exist anymore. And I do think we are deeper and deeper in that world. And that was something that was really difficult to name in the report, but is at the core of the problem that we're facing. And at one point, Gal is talking to Yusuf, I think, and he says, to say no borders is to like, she says, to say no borders is to say no breathing. And I thought that was truly, truly profound. There is a way in which we are in a world or approximating a world where thinking of a world without borders is like thinking of a world without oxygen because they are so normalized. I think also, yeah, maybe I'll stop there because I could go on forever. I realize that I've been going for a while and lost track of time, but I just want to say that it is truly, truly exciting to be joining you all, and I can't recommend the book enough. Don't worry about the report, read the book because it's a really powerful output. So happy to follow up. Malki, I feel like you asked me key questions that I haven't responded to, but it's just as a result of my enthusiasm. Final thing I'll say is that I'm a huge fan of sci-fi as well, and I never imagined that these worlds could collide, and it's a little bit sad. Sci-fi is where I've gone to kind of be free and to escape. And I think this book is powerful because it is showing that yeah, the escapism isn't even possible anymore. We are in this world.
Well, thank you so much. I think you did, in fact, touch on the critical points of my question, but I think you will have more space to discuss it further. I'm going to bring in Amal as well to talk a little bit more about the book itself. But I also just wanted to appreciate deeply your points about, I think, this parallelism between tech that is presented as neutral and inevitable and borders that are presented as neutral and inevitable, and the tricky part of getting people out of that mentality. And I do think that speculative fiction, it's certainly not the only tool, but it's one tool that can be really helpful, especially with a story that grabs people and gets them into thinking about a different world, and hopefully reaches a moment at which it provides some reflection of their own world. And so to talk about that a little bit more, Amal, I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about some of the characters in the book and particularly how they bridge between our time and this future time that the book describes.
Thank you so much, Malka, and thank you, Tendai, for that very kind endorsement of the book. I would urge everyone to read the report as well. I think it's a very powerful report. Uh, so the book, and maybe without giving too much away, I should give a little bit of a synopsis of what happens. So basically, the book is set in this future world of ours, in which everything is heavily bordered, and there's a first world, a second world, and a third world. Sounds familiar, right? And our protagonist, Gull, they live in the second world, which kind of exists to service the first world, and by some kind of uh, what we're not sure what the reason is, but they kind of encounter a border guard that is obviously an AI border guard who determines that they have broken a particular law and therefore they have to be banished to the third world being beyond the border. And the story is about this journey of discovery that Gull goes on when they are in the third world. And what we see in the third world are actually, whereas the first world and the second world are perhaps less less familiar to us, what we see in the third world are actually relics which we can trace back to the world as we know it today. For example, in this third world, there is an entity, or there was an entity called the United Nations, which is extinct, and it's extinct for reasons of its own kind of dysfunction. And I'd actually be interested to ask Tendayi about your take on kind of that possible future for the UN, particularly given its horrendous failings in the context of the genocide of the Palestinian people, amongst many other massive failings. But along the way, Gull also encounters people who come from communities that we will recognize in our world as communities that have been genocided, disenfranchised, marginalized, excluded, made stateless. So, for example, one of the biggest influences on Gull is this Palestinian grandmother, Teta, who kind of talks about kind of connection to land, connection to community, connection to people, and also this indefatigable resolve to kind of continue to fight for justice despite all odds. The Gull also comes across a character from the Rohingya community who is very reminiscent of their culture and their songs and their music, uh, and talks with great nostalgia about what their community has lost, what had been inflicted on them, on this particular character's, forefathers and foremothers in the context of the Rohingya genocide. There are many other characters who actually, through these different characters, what we do is we introduce the reader to the different people who made creative reflections to the book. And through this, what we do is we kind of juxtapose this very sanitized, kind of idealistic vision of borders, and of borders as unquestionable, as supreme, which is the kind of the experience that Gull has had until this moment. And we juxtapose it against a world in which borders were once questionable and once were protested and once were actually called out for being racist, for experimenting on people, and for uh, kind of being extremely violent in how people were treated at borders. And what this does is it creates a kind of a space where Gull is forced to kind of question their inherited, their kind of perceived wisdom. And there's a point in the book at which we as the reader, we wonder whether Gull is going to kind of, are they mature enough? Are they thoughtful enough to go along this journey, or is this something that's going to terrify them? And I'm not going to give any more away, but through that process, what we do see is this kind of coming together and this merging together of different worlds. And it's through that technique that we start seeing the various questions and kind of warnings that Tendai so eloquently puts in her report coming out and being kind of addressed and dealt with through the book. And of course, our hope is that a lot of the work will be done by the reader, because we leave a lot of these questions open for you to also kind of think about them and come to your own conclusions. I think, Marka, you want to bring others into the conversation as well, but maybe I can, before that, just put this question to Tendai in terms of the book's treatment of the UN, and whether you think that is uh, a fair place to go, given where we are today, but also given the fact that yes, the UN may be failing significantly, but we also are in a world in which there aren't many other alternatives.
Yeah, so I should start off by saying that the book is gripping enough that by the time we get to the UN scene, there's a way in which I found myself kind of having like the way I was experiencing what kind of thing the UN was on the terms of how the book led me into it. So I found that itself actually to be a very productive shift, right? So it's like I'm very familiar with that in that institution, but again, I think this is a testament to the book in the sense that, putting it in the border museum and kind of like yeah, treating it in a way that is not typical for how we think about the UN was very productive, and I think also very prescient. And so in the book, the UN is presented as a relic of a prior era. And you asked in your question, Amal, that the UN has failed. We might think about all of the different UN failures when we think about the genocide in Palestine, when we think about all of these things that are taking these seismic shifts in the global order, the way the UN seems to have been unable to change or make a real difference, suggest failure. But I would say that, to my mind, the UN is an expression of the geopolitics of our time, right? It's an institution that reflects the power hierarchies that continue to structure our order. And to my mind, it's a site that has been a site of potential rather than a site of guarantee of, the pursuit of justice, the pursuit of a more equitable global order. And I see it as a site that powerful countries, including the United States and others, have actually resisted the kind of reform and reconfiguration that would have made the UN capable of leading the way to a more just order. So I think about the new international economic order, for example, in the 70s, and the attempts of formerly colonized states to say, let's have a more just economic order. Can we make this happen through the UN? That was repelled. And so that's the conception that I bring to the UN. It reflects the geopolitics of our time. It could have been a more emancipatory institution, but it has been prevented and continues to be prevented from becoming more emancipatory because of the way that power refracts from it. And we see that becoming those dynamics making it more and more marginal in contexts where its intervention are more and more essential. And I think there is a world in which the UN becomes a relic, and it could become a relic for two reasons. The book Gull shows us the worst case scenario, which is that geopolitics become and power hierarchies become ever more acute, and the investment of powerful states and keeping out and extracting from less powerful states only begins to increase, which is, I think, the time that we're in. And in that world, I think the UN becomes the kind of relic that you describe, Amal. It becomes something that it doesn't even resonate with the geopolitics because they've sunk so low that the UN is an untenable institution. But I think there's another possible future where the UN becomes a relic because the nation state as we know it has become a relic, because people have invested in more just ways of living together, right? And when I was thinking about the book and when I was thinking about kind of like the part two that I want to see, this is my pitch for part two of the book. And that part two is, how do we think about the world? How do we think about the third world, right? And what is a future of the third world that isn't indexed to the first and the third, where there are different kinds of institutions of interconnection. I think the book really makes vivid how borders are kind of institutions of exclusion, of extraction, of kind of injustice. But you have to understand that we have to expect that there are ways, and this I think is gestured at in some of the conversations with Teta, of building a world that is about interconnection, where people can move and people can be connected. That's a world too where the UN is a relic, because it's premised on a nation state system that, to my mind, is not compatible with the justice that we are fighting for. So I guess I left hoping that one day the UN will be in a border museum, but a different kind of border museum, one where we've moved to a kind of politics where we see the shortcomings of the UN, even in its most kind of like amplified states, rather than one where it's a relic, because even the kind of basic minimum of every human being is equal becomes untenable because the world is less just.
Thank you for this, both of you. I am nodding along so hard here because all of this it's so important to say. And I think that saying that the UN is a reflection of our geopolitics is also an interesting way of looking at that difficulty of reading UN reports that you referenced, because it's true. And yet they are also the way that power and evidence are so often structured in the society that we have. And so while they may be difficult to read, we're very glad that we have them. And they provide evidence both as a snapshot of the time as it was and of these efforts to do better. But we are also very glad that we have other ways of communicating this, such as this book. And on that note, I do want to bring in, I think we'll bring in the rest of our panelists all together so that we're all here, and then we can ask a few questions to get the conversation going. But if Ruanti and Yasmin and Petra could join, and we can start talking about the way that this book was constructed and the website. And maybe I can start with Ruanti to talk about the artist and activist angle that you used to approach this. A book that's very much about human rights, but also had to be about the creative process and how to connect with people through art. So if you could talk a little bit about that process for you and how you were able to work on this book as something that connected those spheres of research and creativity.
Thank you, Malka. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. This topic has always, it's close to my heart in a kind of a negative way, because every time I need to apply for a visa with a Sri Lankan passport, and the expense of it, the time that is wasted on it, the truly sort of exploitative nature of the whole process. I'm quite used to it. I think many of us are from the global south. We are used to it. So this has always really angered me. I feel that it's one of the last bastions of real racism that people encounter. People are able to hide behind this and pretend that it's all about, security, etc. But really, there's so much racism. There's so much colonialism, colonialist mentalities in the distinctions between, access to certain countries and others. So this was something that I've always been interested in as a human being, as an activist. And then, of course, when I got the chance to write about it, to imagine with a very interesting group of people, if we followed this trajectory, not very far into the future, I must say, we didn't have to do a lot of imagining on this. We're fairly close to the book, scarily close, because reading Tendayi's report, even I was not aware of the level of violence, the level of corruption, and the level of exploitation that asylum seekers are subject to. The most vulnerable travelers, people fleeing, people without passports, without protection, etc. The way they are experimented on, what they're subject to, really horrendous crimes, really, the way their data is sold, the way their privacy is, just absolutely not just respected at all. So reading Tendayi's report was like reading a bit of science fiction. I couldn't believe that this kind of thing was actually happening to people in the world, and that it wasn't talked about more. It wasn't, flagged as a huge atrocity. So it drew me in very quickly, because as an artist, I was fascinated. As an activist, I was absolutely outraged, And there's always, you've asked about the artist activist sort of kind of tension. That's what it is. You as a human being, as an activist, as a world citizen, you're angered by stuff. But as an artist, everything is just interesting. Corruption, racism, hatred, all of that. And as artists, we try to understand what we cannot agree with in order to, really understand how somebody else sees the world, somebody that we feel we have nothing in common with. So that was a very interesting process for myself, and together with Amal, we sort of, and everybody else who contributed to this process, we just went for it. There was a little bit of sort of tiptoeing before we took the plunge with this book about what we really wanted to do with Tendai's report. How far could we go? What could we really call out? But it was a brave little team, and I think we just said everything we wanted to say, and also need that everything that I feel needed to be said, because we committed to really seeing this to its natural end. And for me, it was extremely informative. And writing the book was easy. Reading Tendai's report, not because it was a UN report, Tendai, because it was so disturbing. And I think it's a marvelous document, really. I second Amal's plea, call to just read the report. And also working with all the information that we collected from the contribution of stateless people, asylum seekers who sent in writings which actually reflected their own experiences. So bringing this all together was quite a challenge because we had the UN report, we had these other writings which we needed to protect the integrity of, and then we had to put it all into a story. I mean, we did our best. Uh, uh, it is what it is. I don't think it's ever going to try to be, a work of fiction or anything great like that. It is trying to raise issues in a creative way. And finally, what I want to sort of maybe add to the whole conversation is we often talk about the victims, the people that are subject to these injustices, but I think this book also turns a spotlight on what happens to people who keep these systems going, who believe in these systems, who do not question, who are made so much less human because they are not able to connect anymore. They've lost their sense of human discernment. They are unable to question. They've lost their resistance. They've lost their courage. They've lost their voice. And they are so much closer to being machines, so much more comfortable in the presence of machines, so much more comfortable believing machines, that it's very scary. So I think there is that part to this conversation which I think is really important. What really happens to people who abide by the system, who will never question it. And for me, that's a far scarier place to be than the person who does question and the person who does resist, and even to their own detriment. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie. That is so true. And I think the power of these works, the report and the book, in speaking to the people who are willing to cede their principles and judgment to this existing status quo and to these things we are told are neutral and inevitable, that pushing the question and raising those questions is so important. So many thanks and admiration for all your work on this. And I'm sure that there will be more discussion about these creative aspects of the book as we go on, but I did want to first bring in Yasmin and talk a little bit, open and talk a little bit also to the website part of this artifact, because that is also both very impressive and very important that we have these different ways of approaching the story. whether through a physical book or through this interactive website, and how that functions differently for people. So really interested to hear from you, Yasmin, about your approach to this and what it means to come in to a creative endeavor in moving it from one medium to another.
All right, thank you, Malka. Yeah, so it was very interesting for me because when Amal and Elena reached out to me for the development of the website, I mean, I've been doing websites since 2018, 19. I've been doing websites for generally for like journalists and also maybe education sector or human rights sector, organizations that does like justice work or democracy work. So that's where I usually do my website work. So when Amal and Elena reached out to me, it was literally like, oh, this is very in line with like what I am doing anyways. But then when I got to like read the story and got to know a little bit about the project and everything, I realized that like, oh wow, that this project is in line with me personally in many ways, right? Like not just in ways that like, I mean, since I do websites, like I did study computer science, software engineering when in school, like the way that we talk about tech is the same way how Tendayi mentioned it. Like we like in the I see how the institutions like treat tech in general. Like I remember when I was before I was radicalized, when I was in university, I was thinking like, oh yeah, like more data, this is good. Like we're going to collect more data from people so we can do more things. This is a good thing, you know, like we never see it as like a problem until I was radicalized and I was like, what are we doing? So to see that like in the report and also like in the story, like now understanding the implications of it to like marginalized people, um and yeah, just like, you know, even though like I'm Malaysian, you know, I have like some privilege when I was living in Malaysia. Like I didn't realize this thing until like now I'm living in Europe. Do I see them? So and also like as a reader, just as a reader in general, like I really like dystopian, and so I was like, oh, you know, this is perfect. So there's so many things about this project that's just like, oh, so perfect. So and it's very hard to find a project that is very in line with like my values and politics in general. So in general, that has been a wonderful process. However, I guess the challenging part, I would say, it's mostly has to do with like the like well, you can't speak about politics without like talking about the personal, right? Like I think since I'm living in Portugal, like I am affected by borders, yeah, as simply put, right? So a lot of the personal struggles that I'm experiencing, um it affects my ability to like be present for the process as well, the making the book. And I just love like working with Amal and Lena because they're very accommodating, but at the same time, like yes, I am affected by these things that we are talking about, and sometimes my resources are also limited. Like, you know, if it was up to me, I want to do like way better website. I want something to be like flying when you come in, right? But like but I also had to like be real, like, okay, what is like the capacity that I have, like as someone who is being affected, you know, like having my time, having to balance my time with like my activism, my work, and the bureaucracy, like renewing my visa, like that is like in itself it's such a headache. And then like this year itself, I struggled with housing. And also I'm new to activism and I'm learning how to expand my capacity to like be able to hold everything without collapsing. And that is like difficult in itself. So like, yeah, I know that like what I'm doing is the best that I can do, but at the same time, like, also like I guess that would be like I would say like the challenge of like doing this, but it's so rewarding. I have to admit that like this is one of the best projects I've worked in. So like, I'm grateful.
Thank you so much for that, Yasmin. I'm sure we can all relate to these challenges of holding everything at once, particularly when we look at subjects like this book and the report. And on that note, perhaps it's a good time to bring in Petra to talk a little bit. Also, you have a vast experience in looking at migration and technology. No, different Petra. Sorry. And I don't know if you want to talk specifically, sharing the anecdote that you share in the book, or if you'd rather talk more generally about these questions of really how we move forward into a better place and how the book and the website can support doing that.
Thanks so much, Malka, and thanks again to all of you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm someone who's been cheering this project on for the many years that it's been getting put together, and it's really remarkable to see it all come to fruition. So congratulations to everybody, and again, it's a real treat to be here. I think I would like to maybe reflect more generally on where we can go, because so many of these topics are so dystopic and dark. I mean, it's really important to sit in the darkness and in the recognition of how difficult, the current planetary moment is, with multiple genocides, resource extraction, environmental collapse. And Yasmin, I think you put it really well, this kind of question that so many of us have of our own kind of capacity as we are humans moving through the world and trying to make sense of all of this. But I think there's also such an opportunity for an examination of exactly where we go from this moment. And there's a few different ways that I think we can approach it. I mean, this project in particular is such an amazing example of interdisciplinarity. And I don't just mean that in like the kind of academic-y sense, but more as an invitation for us to come together and talk to each other across lived experience, across our own particular positionality that brings us to the work that we do, what informs the way that we look at the world and how we choose to kind of move through it. I think it's such an important reminder of the fact that we all have something to bring to the table, no matter what our background or our experience. And this is also another point I wanted to make. The kind of arts-based methodology that Tendayi alluded to, whether we kind of want to look at it from a sci-fi perspective or from a storytelling perspective or an interactive website perspective, such an important tool to get us to think beyond the kind of boxes that the kind of status quo mentality wants us to remain in, right? Lawyers in one silo, academics in another silo, activists in another silo, artists somewhere else altogether. But I think what this book really shows, I mean, it's not even, I think it's so much more than a book. I mean, it's a whole kind of project of imagining and otherwise, to quote a wonderful author, Lola Olufemi. I think this is a really important moment because otherwise we will just be stuck in these kind of established ways of thinking. And this is, I think, perhaps where technology is a really important lens to try and examine some of these problems that seem so kind of intractable or stuck, or inevitable. Sometimes when I talk to the private sector, that's one of the major players behind the development and deployment of so much of the technology that we see harming people and communities in what's essentially become a multi-billion-dollar industry. And sometimes we call it the border industrial complex. When we talk to these private sector actors, they make it seem like technology, AI, data, algorithms are inevitable. And then it's almost like, well, the train has left the station, so you special interest advocates or activists or academics, like, what are you talking about? Because of course we're going to have AI, of course we're going to have these kind of tools, which more often than not, of course, are tools of oppression. But I would challenge that, and I would actually invite all of us to think about, well, maybe it's not as inevitable as these power brokers would have us believe. And there are so many ways that affected communities in particular need to be the ones who are in the driver's seat when it comes to kind of thinking about, well, if not this reality, then what, what does an otherwise look like? What can the world look like? Maybe a world that's centered on care, togetherness, participation, diversity, and diversity of thought. I know that these kind of terms and ideas are thrown around a lot, but there are some practical ways that we can come together in these kind of imaginaries of an otherwise, whether that's a forum like this. One of the projects we run is called the Migration Technology Monitor, where we work directly with colleagues on the move, people who are affected by border violence every day, but who are also themselves using technology in very particular ways to challenge the kind of established status quo. A lot of it is also just about pushing resources into affected communities and people who are already doing the work to challenge this kind of established world order. And as difficult as this current moment is across the world, in all our backyards and all our own communities, I think it's also an invitation for us to really think creatively about what kind of world we're building and what actually is possible.
Thank you so much for that, Petra. I agree very much that we, in this moment of difficulty, we're also in a moment of opportunity, and creative approaches like this are one of the ways that we can together work towards something better. I know we have at least one question, and we're also coming towards the end of our time, although not there yet. But I wanted to see if anyone, particularly Amal, if you had anything that you wanted to add to the discussion at this point before we do move on to audience questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to pick up on something which both Tendayi and Petra said in different ways. So like Tendayi, kind of you mentioned when talking about kind of the UN as a relic of the future, you talked about the second way in which the UN could become a relic, which is more because the nation state itself becomes irrelevant and because people kind of build community, organize ourselves that's in a kind of a more solidarity based way. And then Petra, what you just said now pretty much kind of resonates with that same worldview. And I think that this kind of perspective can sound very idealistic, but I think and naive, but I think we are made to almost feel embarrassed into thinking that it sounds very idealistic and naive because it so goes against the extractive liberal colonialist capitalist kind of system that we live in. But this idea of building a world which is grounded in community, grounded in relationships, grounded in care, it's very powerful, and it's actually something which, if you look at where community actually means community, you have those things in place. And the question is, how do we build on that, whether it's kind of family or close-knit groups of friends or kind of wider communities that kind of actually look out for each other. So I think the question is then, how do we build this up into strong solidarities that kind of extend beyond specific communities, beyond borders, and this idea of kind of building movements which are really kind of rooted in people. And in the statelessness field, there is one very strong example of that in the way a global movement against statelessness has been evolving over the last few years. And I think there are lots of challenges that we are also kind of encountering in our efforts to kind of build a global movement. But those challenges are inevitable given the nature of what we're trying to do. But I think the extent to which we are able to stick with it and to also reach out to other groups doing similarly, kind of trying to build community, to mobilize action through kind of techniques that are rooted in human relationships and in care. The more we're able to do that, I think the more we're able to reject the way the world expects us to operate, the way the world expects us to kind of interact with each other, to compete with each other. The more we will see the building blocks of a possible future. So I'd like to just maybe throw it out to the panel, and I think this also is very much to do with the way artists and activists can work together, lawyers, journalists, writers, like so many people are doing this work, but we are doing it in a way which we tend to feel isolated, and we are being isolated. And maybe Malka, this is a chance for you to also speak a little bit about global voices, but how do we, do better to kind of connect more effectively with each other to build a force which is really capable of holding a mirror to and challenging this prevailing status quo, which so many of us are fed up with and feel is failing us as a whole.
Yes. Well, thank you for that, Q. Amal. Just very briefly, because I don't want to take time from the other panelists, but Global Voices is a community of journalists, contributors, translators, with the mission of just trying to amplify underrepresented voices in the digital sphere. So we just want to make sure that we have a really heterogeneous, representative internet, because all of these technologies that we've been talking about that can be so harmful and so oppressive, we also see that there are technologies that have incredible potential for democratization, for building empathy and bridges and allowing us to see more viewpoints than before. And so we are trying to work on that side of things, and also just really build that empathy across borders so that people are able to connect more with those that they normally don't encounter physically. So that's, we continue trying to do that. But Tendayi, I know you have to leave soon, so I want to give you a chance to speak a little bit before you do, just to respond and give a final word that's so valuable.
Thank you. And so sorry to have to leave before everybody else, but I was just going to say that it's been really wonderful to hear everybody on this panel. Really recommend the book and also Petra's book for those of you who want to take an even a deeper dive into the experimentation side of things. But to Amal's point, which I think I've been thinking about a lot, what is realistic? What is unrealistic? What is Pollyannish? We are in a time where I feel as though so many of the things that we have been told are realistic are being proven to be untenable, right? So we think about borders. I think migration, the way that people are moving, continues to show that this particular way of arranging our world is unrealistic, it's unpragmatic. When we think about liberal democracy that has been crafted in a way that relies on racialization, for example, to sustain the thriving, we are being shown that that's unrealistic. So there's something about this question around what's realistic and what's unrealistic that, to my mind, has me feeling excited about imagining potential futures, because if anything is being shown to be unrealistic, it's the status quo. And when I talk about a deep critique of the nation state, I want to be clear that it's not a critique of statehood. It's not a critique of people organizing. It's not a critique of people living in community. It's a critique of this particular arrangement that we have that understands borders to be these violent, extractive institutions on which we have to organize all of our lives around. Anyway, so I guess that's the note I want to end on. I think we are in a time where so much of what we have been told is required, necessary, realistic, pragmatic, is being shown to be profoundly untenable. And it does mean that dreaming actually may be the place where we go to discover the things that are realistic, that are the things that are sustainable and that can allow us to live and thrive together. So thank you to Amal and Ruanti for putting together, I think, a way of destabilizing our understanding of kind of what is normal now in ways that are productive for that endeavor of reimagining. So take care, everyone. Really sorry to have to rush, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. Beautifully said. And Ruanti, Yasmin, Petra, if you want to respond, and then we should move on to the audience questions after that. Ruanti, Petra, either of you? Not yet. Why don't we go to the first question then? And perhaps some of the points will also come up in those. Okay, so the first question that we have,
Isn't your call ended?
sorry, the call is not quite ended yet. But I will help you in a moment. The first audience question that we have is about the book looking at at narrative extremes, but also at that there's some ways in which it sounds utopian. And if anyone would like to comment on that sort of balance and contrast.
Sorry,
Malka,
I didn't catch the question. I
Sorry.
couldn't hear it.
I had some audio disturbance. It's also in the chat for people to look at.
Okay.
This one is from 1655 to make it easier to find, but it says, I'm trying to understand and I will surely read the book to get the real understanding. But to me, it is looking like a futuristic thing to narrate the extremes, but it also sounds to me utopian. Any comments? And I think for me as a speculative fiction writer, you know, utopian and dystopian are these sometimes flip sides of the same coin in terms of having hope and having warning at these two extremes. But I think that there's also can be places where they're quite close or where there's nuance in between. And so would be interested in your perspectives in this book.
Okay, I'll take this. I mean, I think the book is, as Malka said, sort of utopian and dystopian in sort of equal measures. And I think ultimately, for me, the utopia, if at all, lies in Gull's personal journey. What they discover they are capable of doing, or what they discover that they have within themselves. And I think that was really necessary for this book, because Gull is living in such a bleak world, actually. And our only answer to the challenges that we face, however bleak they may be, is that we are able to reflect on what we have done wrong, what we have gotten wrong, and that we will help each other and help ourselves to try to find answers, better answers, you know. And I think that's about the human spirit, really, for me. And really, it is a call, this little book is a call to return to those most precious human qualities within us, you know, qualities of human connection, of friendship, of relationships, of listening, of caring, all of that. But also the other sort of human skills of being able to think for yourself, being able to discern uh, 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 things like that, being able to have courage. And I think these are qualities that we risk losing the more we sort of surrender ourselves to this, what Petra so cleverly put as a sort of inevitable sort of technological track that we're all seem to be on. So I don't think I answered the question very well, but I'm trying to. What I'm trying to say is, I think it's okay to be a little utopian, to give ourselves a little bit of courage and some hope, because the world around us is, is not a very happy place right now. And I think whatever gives us spirit and courage, I think, yeah, use that.
I think that was a very good answer. And as someone who gets asked about dystopianism and utopianism a lot, it's not an easy thing to respond to. I'll just read the other questions because we are running a bit short on time for the wonderful number of questions that we've gotten. And so then perhaps you can also choose if there's some that speak to you more that you can answer directly. So we have another question about the way the themes in the book are so critical and topical. And it's such a powerful way to get people to think again or differently. And so the question is, who do you most hope will read the book? And is there a way to make sure that they do? Which is an excellent question. Another one, which I think perhaps you touched on a little bit, Ruanti, but perhaps others want to also add to this. What does hope look like in the book? And what is the hope that the impact of this book will have? And then we do have another, the last question so far is, we know that anti-right actors have come together to use many social justice techniques against us, such as transnational organizing, using rights-based language. We just saw an example of that. I think it was yesterday. How important do you all think it is for us to flip the script to push back? Lessons from Mamdani's campaign come to mind, for example, using the facts and figures of dollars used by the establishment as a point against them, leaning into the strengths of community organizing, etc., including using big data against the state capital collaboration. So 3 points about who we want to read the book and how we do that, about hope in the book and our hopes for the impact of the book, both which was somewhat related to the first two. And then this question about the way that the language of this kind of activism can be co-opted and what are the responses to that. I will just say very quickly before I pass it over to you that for books, usually my hope is that the people who read it are the ones, not the ones who are against this so much as the ones who never think about it, the ones who take the world as it is for granted. And that these kinds of books are ways that people can move beyond that. And I'll pass it to the rest of you to go further.
I've been speaking a lot, so I'm hesitant to kick us off. Yasmin or Petra, do you guys want to come in? If not, I'm happy to go first. Okay. Yeah, I think in terms of both the hope question and the readership question, I agree fully with Malka that we're trying to target people who won't necessarily think about these issues or who won't necessarily think about these issues in these ways. But I think we're also trying to target people who do think about these issues and who work on them and who are stuck in how they work on them and how they think about them and kind of are stuck in patterns which lead to their own kind of cycle of, not questioning, not thinking, but just kind of going through the motions. I have found in the past that like whenever I've written for children, that's when I've written best because you force yourself to kind of not use any jargon and you force yourself to write in a way which ultimately is really honest. And this book isn't quite written for children, but it is nonetheless written for a non-specialist audience. And certainly it's a book which I would say a young teenager can pick up and read. And so targeting young audiences, but also targeting adults who are thinking people or who are non-thinking people. I think this book is potentially quite versatile in who its readership can be. I would love to see the book being picked up in different contexts, and I think that at ISI, one of the things that we struggle to do is to kind of follow through with kind of distribution and dissemination. And anyone who can help with that, we would be very grateful if you have ideas. I saw a comment which I fully agree with in the Q&A about whether Amazon is the best platform to kind of actually get the book out there. And we do need to look at more sustainable, more kind of morally aligned entities also to get the book out there. But also we will be printing copies of the book as well. So hopefully that way the book will reach different audiences. But equally, if people would like to, use this book as a way of facilitating a conversation in a school, within a community, at a conference or event, please do so. It's yours to use. I think the question of hope, and this also aligns a little bit with Ruanti's answer to the question of utopia. I think if you look at it from a utopia point of view, there's like in the first world and the second world, there's no utopia, right? It's all a dystopia. You will see that as you read the book. But in the third world, there's this real clash of utopia and dystopia. And dystopia in terms of what this community is being subject to. And utopia in terms of its resistance to that. And its resistance to that both at a communal level, but also at an individual level. And Ruanti spoke quite extensively about individual qualities, but I think the communal qualities as well of kind of coming together, sharing, solidarity. And these are all things that I think bring hope and can project hope as well. So let me pause my answer there without also tackling the third question and hand over to the others.
Anyone else feel like jumping in on this one or the other questions that I read, if you have things that have come to mind on any of those? We only have really a short time left. So any thoughts that you want to add in general beyond these questions would also be welcome.
I can also sorry, Ruanti, you wanted to?
Yeah, I think I might say about who I would like to read the book. I'd say I'd love young people to read the book because they've been brought up with technology, and so reach for it so much more easily, so much more trustingly than people like us who've been were introduced to technology in our 30s or 40s even. So I think I really wish that young people, not just this book, but would continue to question the convenience, these myths of convenience, security, all of that are sold to them, told to us all the time, and understand that understand what people sacrifice, what is lost when these things are gained, not just lost what other people lose, but also what you lose, what you lose in yourself. So I think I would really encourage young people to read and hope that they do. The other group of people that I think I wish would read books like this, or a book like this, or turn to issues like this are people who live in countries that actually exercise these kinds of exercise this kind of violence at their borders. And I think it's important to note that not all countries do resort to this. There's definitely two kinds of sort of borders in bordered countries in the world, and I do think that many citizens of the countries that have these really violent, exploitative borders don't push themselves to the level of discomfort that they should about what's happening to people who are not from those countries. So I think that conversation is something that we need to push more and more, and it's conversations that we also need to have with our friends, with people that we have solidarity on lots of other human rights issues, because it is a huge divider in the world, and I don't think we really address it enough, because it also lends itself to a huge amount of convenience of travel, etc., access, and the world is divided like that. And I live in a country that has a very easy sort of passport system. Anybody can come here. we are economically bankrupt, so we welcome anybody here. And yet, people from our country can travel. We hardly get to travel anywhere because our passport is so weak. So that kind of imbalance, I think, is something that I wish people would address more directly and more honestly in our conversations.
Indeed. Thank you very much. We are running short on time, but Yasmin and Petra, if you would like to add some final thoughts.
Yeah, maybe I can say something, I guess. Especially in the question about like who should read it, or like how are we going to get it. I think at the end of the day, it's like it starts with the people who are here, it starts with the people who are in the participants, who know about this book. Push it to your local communities, push it to our local like book club, our local libraries. It starts there, I think. It's yeah, with like social media being a thing, and like we don't know who we have influence over in small scale and big scales. And it's when we talk about things and word of mouth, it has been like I've been realizing, like living more like in community, like word of mouth is like very very, it's very powerful tool. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's like, yes, it's like it's just how many, 55 of us in 55 of us, 70 of us, but it can create a ripple. So yeah, I would just believe in the power of community and like doing anything. So I think that's where it starts.
Absolutely. Really excellent point. Thank you for bringing that out. Petra, if you don't want to add anything, that's also okay. I'm not going to pressure you, but if you'd like to, it's a good chance.
Just very briefly, I think in these times it's so easy to feel maybe dejected or uncertain of how to proceed. But it makes me think of a quote that I have written above my desk. It's by an abolitionist writer, Mariam Kaba, and she reminds us that hope is a discipline. It's something active that we practice all together. And I think this is a reminder that we can kind of come together, right, as Yasmin is reminding us, and we can choose to work in these kind of careful community ways, and artistic ways and interesting ways, around these kind of intractable problems. And then maybe all of a sudden they won't seem quite so inevitable or intractable, but the hope will kind of propel us forward, that we can actually build a different world together.
Thank you. That is a perfect note to end on. I think we are all coming to this, from the panelists to the participants, in a position to continue to make the world better little by little as we go. And we would like to ask that you share the book and the website in your communities where you think it will be most helpful or welcome or interesting or useful for people to have. And hopefully, as you continue doing your own work in the world, if there are times when it comes up and you think of the book, you will also have these resources to share it with people, and share these insights, the book and the report, I should say, certainly. So thank you all for joining us. Really very appreciated that you've spent the time. Huge thanks to all of the panelists, because this has been a very enlightening and interesting discussion for me, certainly, as well, and I hope for all of you. Amal, do you want to say any final words about where to find the book or any other things that people should be aware of? And then we can close.
Yeah, I mean, Christmas is coming up. It may be a nice gift to give someone. Sorry, it's only available on Amazon now to buy, but we will look at other options as well. And also, just to kind of finally say, I said it at the beginning, but like a huge thank you to the other members of the creative team who aren't represented on the panel. So in particular, Hannah, and who kind of illustrated and also designed the book, and Ottiline, who coordinated, wrote, edited. She did a lot of work on the book. Banuja, who also helped with writing and research. Elena, who's on the call, but you can't see her. She's making sure that everything goes smoothly with Zoom. and also Callio, who kind of helped with the website design. Ilroy also helped with the website. And I'm not going to read all their names, but the many contributors to the book who you can see their names and you can read their contributions, their reflections on the website, which I would encourage you to do. This really was a collective effort, and it wouldn't have been possible without all of that support. I also wanted to thank Petra. I should have thanked you at the beginning because you were pivotal in making this happen, also through the Migration and Tech Monitor and some of the financial support that you were able to kind of gather for this process at the outset. So thank you for sticking with this over the years. And yes, I hope you are all able to read the book and share your feedback with us.
Thank you again.